Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. It's interesting. We have so many topics today. I thought it was interesting. The Broncos, now was the final 31-13 over the Colts. The Broncos 31-13. So Bo Nix had three
31-13.
picks
31-13.
and also finished with 3 touchdowns. I got to tell you something. The Colts had a great game plan, dominated early, 20-7 lead. If Jonathan Taylor doesn't drop, I never thought of Jonathan Taylor as a knucklehead. But the minute he did that, I just kind of put him in a different camp. I'm like, oh, you're one of those guys. Like, okay. Jonathan Taylor, for the uninitiated, dropped a long touchdown run at the goal line, and it's called back. But what I thought was really interesting today is Bo Nix was overshooting his targets, really struggling. They both had time off, so he came in with a ton of energy and didn't use it to his advantage. But they go in at halftime, and Anthony Richardson at one point was 12 for 29, no touchdowns, 2 picks. That was classic coaching. They made adjustments at halftime, and the Colts offense dried up. And Bo Nix, despite a horrible first half, John, they didn't quit on him. They did not quit. They had a huge return by Mims. They continued to let Bo Nix throw. And my 2 takeaways in this game is I'm not sure Anthony Richardson, I'm not sure he's a starting quarterback in the league. I just don't think he sees the field at all. And my second take is Sean Payton's the coach of the year. This team is going to make the playoffs. And they're not only going to make the playoffs, they now can win when they play poorly. They beat the Jets when they played poorly on the road. They played poorly for 3 quarters today. How surprised are you by it?
Well, I thought at one point in time in the game, it felt like there were 25 turnovers. They were throwing picks every other series. I think, how good is Benito, the pass rusher that had the pick
Holy
six
God.
against? And I thought that play was pretty symbolic. The game's kind of on the line, and they have a top 5 quarterback, and they got to run a crazy trick play. Why? Because the guy can't function. I really think Jonathan Taylor's lucky that his quarterback's such a disaster, because that story's going to, I would say, overtake his drop. He was that bad. He was atrocious. You can't function with him, Colin. You can't. You saw Bo Nix. Listen, he looked like a rookie early in that game. He got fooled on a pass. He threw another pass right to a linebacker. It was just your classic. When Jonathan Taylor was running the ball in there, you just went, hey, this is one of your classic rookie games where he just has a complete dud. You lose, but it's not the end of the world. Colts are desperate. Their season's on the line. And then that, all of a sudden, I looked up and I was like, how did Denver have the ball? And then you look and you realize what happened. And then that
Denver
all flipped.
Denver outscored Indy 24-0 after the Taylor fumble, forced 3 turnovers, including a pick 6. And I think to your point is the Taylor fumble will get all the attention. But now think about this. We all know how good Shane Steichen is. That goes without saying. He made Jalen Hurts an MVP level quarterback. Jalen Hurts today looked like that regularly with Shane Steichen.
Yeah.
That's what he looked like all the time with Shane Steichen. Now it's an outlier. Justin Herbert broke records. He made Gardner Minshew last year, like 1 game from the playoffs. He couldn't do anything in the second half. Like, he has halves. He can't do anything with Anthony Richardson. Bo Nix can struggle, but John, they'll go into half, they'll come out, and Bo Nix is firing and accurate and moving. Like, there's a big gap between those two.
To me, Bo Nix has a rhythm and a feel to his game and can function from within the pocket. Now, he's still got to get better. He's a rookie. Anthony Richardson has no feel, cannot function, has no touch. He threw a pick today on like a lollipop throw. It was like, what? It looked like a junior high pass.
Yeah.
And obviously, and I think these are the worst type players, are the ones that are truly physically gifted. Because it's like, if we could just, I think you could just go, this is never going to work. The likelihood, we have seen the occasional guys improve on accuracy. Josh Allen's a great example. Lamar clearly. Anthony Richardson feels like he regresses. Or not even, he's just bad. He just, when it comes to throwing from within the pocket, you cannot function in the modern day NFL with a quarterback like that. And why Denver was in such trouble before he dropped the ball is like, they're going to get 280 yards on the ground. between Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor. That's the only way they can beat you.
Yeah.
But then they got the lead, and all of a sudden Anthony Richardson had to pass. And it was like, oh, this is not going to work. And I don't think that's coachable at this point.
Yep.
I think it's clear he has touch, feel issues that you just can't overcome. Listen, Jalen Hurts is never going to be Peyton Manning or Aaron Rodgers from the pocket, right? Or Drew Brees or a true pocket quarterback. But you go back to Oklahoma and Alabama, there is a feel to play quarterback. There are things he does pretty well. Even Anthony Richardson on the move, like one thing Jalen does a great job of is when he scrambles, keeps his eyes, and can make a very accurate pass. You watch Anthony Richardson scrambles, and he'll throw these 200-mile-an-hour fastballs that will skip by the wide receiver's feet, who's kind of open running back to the sideline. You're like, I just don't think he can get his body to do touch passes. And I think it's very, very difficult for a guy. And listen, we've seen this in baseball for a long time. Guys that only throw 100 and got nothing else, and they can't throw a strike. Usually all of a sudden the light doesn't switch, or the switch doesn't light up and go, boom, okay, I'm accurate now, or I can throw a bunch of strikes. It feels, I don't listen, I'm no expert on mechanics with throwing, but there is some twitch muscle in his shoulder that doesn't allow him. Jalen, some of these, Kyler Murray, I watched him when he scrambles, he can do, touch lollipop passes. Anthony Richardson is just throwing as hard as humanly possible. He would have way more picks if he didn't throw the ball so hard.
Thursday Night Football is on. It's only on Prime Video. Best season yet, packed with big rivalries and even bigger stars. Al Michaels, Kirk Herbstreit, Kaylee Hartung every week. Games you can't miss. Coverage begins at 7 Eastern with football's best party. TNF tonight, Thursday Night Football tonight. If you're not a Prime member, no problem. Sign up. 30-day free trial. Cancel anytime. Thursday Night Football, and it's on Prime Video. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details. I look at all these games because I want to talk about Brock Purdy, Belichick, and the Heisman Trophy with you. But I will say, I'll just throw this out there: Bucks 40, Chargers 17. 6 straight defensive stops. Todd Bowles in that defense against Herbert. The number one defense in the league gave up 40. Mike Evans was a problem for the Chargers.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, there's clearly an upper crust right now in the league. Kansas City, I think Baltimore, Buffalo. I think Detroit, maybe Green Bay by the time we're doing this, if they win tonight in Seattle. I think they will. I think they're a better team, but don't trust me. And I think Philadelphia. Then there's a second level of teams, and I think we put Pittsburgh in there, maybe a Houston, maybe. For whatever reasons, we don't really want to put Tampa in there. But they kicked the shit out of the Chargers today. I mean, Chargers couldn't run on them. Herbert was constantly under duress. Meanwhile, Baker Mayfield had time to throw. Their receivers were beating the secondary for the Chargers. I thought it was. I didn't, by the second half, I didn't even know what the Chargers' offensive plan was. Between Jason Light's roster, the GM, and Baker Mayfield, he and Darnold, and by the way, Baker can still throw really bad picks. He's got him within his game. But I was watching that today, and you can't run on Tampa. Can't run on him. Vita V in the middle, can't run on him. Todd Bowles has always been an excellent defensive coordinator. I'm sitting watching it, and I'm like, they're going to beat somebody in the playoffs. You better be careful. That team, I mean, that's the kind of team that could go to Philadelphia as a 9-point dog. Saquon couldn't run. The weather's crappy, and you end up with a 21-20 football game to me.
Well, they got a couple things going for them. One, they got high-end offensive players. I mean, Bucky Irving is really good.
Yeah.
The running back. Baker Mayfield has played in multiple playoff games now and won them. Right, go back to 2020 against the Steelers, last year against the Eagles. So he's comfortable. He's a bright lights guy. And I'm with you. Early on in that game, he throws that pick. You're like, oh, this Minter Charger defense is going to be tough. And then he settled down. The gap between the offensive skill guys on this team, or between the two teams, was pretty evident. Is J.K. Dobbins Walter Payton or something? How can they lose him and not function in the run game without the guy? I don't get it. I like J.K. Dobbins as much as the next guy. Seems like an impressive guy and good player. But a Harbaugh team has, especially this one with their offensive skill, has no chance against a non-playoff team running the ball for 32 yards. Looking right now, They had 11 rushes for 32 yards. Jim
Yeah.
Harbaugh, if you go back since he's been coaching at San Diego, that is a recipe to lose. Now, obviously, they got back or they got behind, so they had to try to get back into the game and throw the ball. But then they're not built to do that. What he's done with Quentin Johnson to me is pretty commendable. The guy has 8 touchdowns. I mean, last year we were
Yeah.
talking about the guy as a complete bust, and actually he's a kind of a functional player. But it's basically him and McConkey. You're not coming back on Mike Evans, who is going straight to the Hall of Fame. Otten is a good player, right? And McMillan had a big game today. I mean, once they lost Godwin, you went, I don't know. And Evans had hurt the hammy. Evans came back, shows no signs of that hamstring, and other guys have stepped up. And the other thing that at the end of the Brady era, remember, it was like they're a historically shitty running team. And then a couple years later, they got Bucky Irving, and he's now the starter, and he has big plays every game. And the Baker, the momentum. Remember when Dorsey drafted Baker? A lot of it was on like the Favre bravado and cockiness. You can't have that in the NFL when you're not playing well. But I would say for the last 2 years in Tampa, his energy is pretty palpable to them, and you feel it when they get rolling. And their best player, Mike Evans, they clearly have a pretty for as shitty as the rapport was with him and OBJ back in the day. Theirs is high level, and it showed today. I mean, the Chargers had no answer. And here's the other thing. Obviously, the Chargers can't run the ball. If their defense isn't covering people, they're in major. That's their formula. They can't win any other way.
So the Bucs have won 4 straight. In each game, they've had 400 plus yards and 150 plus rushing yards. So it's White, it's Bucky Irving, it's Baker playing with a ton of confidence, and they had like an unsportsmanlike conduct. They're chirpy. Like they're the worst kind of underdog to play because they think they're better than you, even though they're not. But they're like a relentless. They're like a fighter that's like 40-28 with a good punch. Like they're not refined. They're not terribly polished, but they play like they think they're the best team in the league. And I don't know. I could see them absolutely going and beating a Detroit. I really could. I think first of all, they just, as you said, their skill players are really good. They're really good. And today they gave Baker time to throw. And, a couple of times Baker went out and moved. We always knew in that class that Darnold was a little bit better athlete than Baker. But Baker, remember years ago in Cleveland when he screwed his shoulder up? And I felt for like a year and a half he wasn't right. It felt like he was just always playing hurt. He's healthy now. And he's worked hard at it. He's pretty athletic. He can get up and move.
Well, you saw Jared Goff today. When you hit Jared Goff, he's much more like Cousins. He's not going to run around. I know he had a running first down, but you hit him, it can throw him off. Baker, much more like a lot of these athletic guys in the league. He's some hybrid version of a pocket quarterback, but he definitely has lost weight and he can move. I assumed I like the Chargers today. I thought the Chargers would win at home against the Bucs.
Same.
And the Atlanta plays the Raiders tomorrow, so all of a sudden they'd be tied, and Atlanta's beat them twice. I'm like, listen, the Bucs are having a commendable season. They are in the driver's seat right now, Colin, because they end with the Panthers and the Saints. Now the Cowboys are playing pretty well. That's a Sunday night game next week, but I'm gonna like the Bucs in that spot. They easily could win out, and then Atlanta doesn't control their own destiny. If I would have told you at the beginning of the season that Atlanta, after all the hoopla of giving $100 million of basically laughing Belichick out and going with Raheem Morris, missed the playoffs. I mean, because they're only getting one team in, and the Bucs be a huge muscle flex for Baker, for Jason Light, for Todd Bowles. Because when you talk about the chippiness, like I worked with Todd in Philly, Todd doesn't say anything. It starts with Baker. Baker gives him that mentality, and honestly, Jason Light has a little bit of that too. He likes those type players. And they didn't even have Winfield today. So I think the Bucs, I'm with you. They would be a danger because they get a home game. It's the thing. You win the division, even if you host the Lions or Minnesota, if you're the 4-5, we've seen them before in that spot win that game, right? Host that game and win it.
So right now, Chiefs, the number 1 seed, Bills second, Steelers third, Texans 4, Broncos 4, Ravens 4. They're all tied, and then the Chargers 7th. So because the Dolphins lost, It's still a 2-game lead for the Chargers over the final playoff spot and the Dodgers and the Chargers. So in the NFC as of right now,
I think the Dolphins stink. I mean, the
yeah,
Dolphins.
yeah,
Give me.
dink and dunk Tua.
Yeah.
It's the Eagles and Lions tied for the number 1 seed. Vikings 3, Packers 4. They're playing tonight. Commanders 5, Seahawks 6, Buccaneers 7. Rams are right up against it. So the Rams, Buccaneers, I think the Rams right now are better than the Buccaneers, but I don't think it's by a lot. I think I'll take McVay and Stafford over Bowles and Baker. But that run game, Kyron Williams in that run game, you'd have to win it through the air because you're not running against Tampa. If I said right now, Rams, Tampa, who would you take?
I'd probably take the Rams.
Yeah.
I would give a slight edge. I mean, the coaching edge to McVay. I would listen. Baker's having a great year, but I'm taking Stafford. Uh, Now, that game. We'll see because I think there's a pretty good chance that the Rams and Seattle both get into the playoff. Whoever doesn't win the division is the 7 seed, and that's a tough 7 seed. I mean, we saw last year, right? It was Rams Detroit round 1, and the Rams easily could have won that thing in the wild card game.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing about Seattle, depending on their matchup. Like if you told me Seattle was the 7, I think we talked about this. And let's say Minnesota wins that division, and the Eagles are the 1, and Minnesota's the 2. Well, we like Seattle in a dome, right? I mean, with their
Right.
skill guys. So I think I think the NFC playoffs, which early is like, I don't know, I think it's going to be pretty good. I think all these underdogs and wild card teams, the road teams, could win all these road games. That's why getting that number 1 seed for Philly, it'd be pretty tough to go on the road to Philly, right? So they're in the driver's seat now with Detroit, who still has tough games remaining. They still play Minnesota. It's just hard to win these games when you have injuries. That's the other thing with the Rams. Feels like they're getting healthy. I mean that Rams game, to win that game, didn't it show you though that first half? These are two tough physical teams, pouring rain on the West Coast. They can't function, right? You put that game in the AFC North or Buffalo or Green Bay, those teams are so comfortable. You get the Rams and the Niners that they can't do anything in the first half in just a 55-degree rainstorm.